them to email them to me. But for the animal ones, they need to probably go to Kayla.
Okay, because what I was gonna do is, like for us, I'm setting up a discussion thread for each of our lab assignments. I was gonna put them in both classes instead of having some people log into some people log into another, and then just post them in whichever makes them happy and then grade it. But I didn't want to interfere with you. But I'm gonna have them do the grocery store one directly to you.
Yeah, I would like to do that, and I would like for them to do the majority of the plant ones directly to me, if it's okay. It's a little easier for me to. What I normally do is print stuff off, and then I'll grade it at home, and in a little more leisurely than in my office here.
Okay. Okay, so I guess what I'll do is I'll send an email and I'll actually have them. I'll have them so I can keep up with what they've done. Have them post them in Blackboard, but also have it email them to you.
Right. That'll work. That'll work.
Okay. Cool.
And as far as the lab exercises, I got a question or two from somebody that emailed them to me, and I've been sort of on a crazy schedule this week and may not have gotten responded to the emails. But what I'm primarily interested in is for each of you to do a grocery store search using 2 different grocery stores. And my objective is for you to gain an understanding of the diversity of the produce products that we have available to us and their sources of supply. It's also helpful if you evaluate the cost of those. Sometimes there's a dramatic difference in pricing. I'll use bananas as an example. The bananas that we have coming out of the Caribbean, usually Uruguay, somewhere down there. And normal grocery store price on bananas here in Kroger is 59 cents a pound. We have an Aldi that's here, and their price on bananas on an everyday price is normally about 43 or 44 cents. They're running a special this week for 29 cents. And I buy bananas on a wholesale basis from my produce market, and they cost me on an average about 49 cents. Bananas come in a 40-pound box, and they're costing me, that much. So it's always a mystery to me a little bit about how some chain stores can sell things at less than what they cost me. But that's part of their market, and Tom will talk about that in the other class that you have. But that's just an example that you would potentially compare those. It's just a sort of an elementary type of exercise, so you'll gain a little better appreciation of where your foodstuffs come from. So, any questions anybody has? If you don't want to ask them now, I'll try to respond to an email when I get caught up a little more. I've just been had a whole lot of balls in the air this week trying to get everything done.
Carolyn has a question she's working on for you.
Okay, Carolyn.
Verbalizing.
Yes, verbalizing. Yes. So would you like the 25 items from each store to be set up at one chart and then another chart, like in Excel?
That's probably the easiest way to do it. I'm not a real stickler for formatting or anything. Whatever's easier for you, but to me it would be easier to go to Food Line or Walmart, list 25 items, list where they came from and the cost per pound or per unit, then go to Another store, do the same thing. You don't have to put them on the same Excel sheet to compare them. That's not my goal. My goal is for you to gain an understanding of a comparative nature, okay?
Yes, sir.
So if
Thank
I put on a Word document, like one page is Walmart and my next page is Food Lion, and that's just on a Word document and everything's there, is that cool?
That makes me fat and happy. You're good. That's okay.
Awesome.
Okay? Simplify, okay? I've been on this earth too long to try to create a crisis for you guys, so I just don't want to do that. Okay?
Are we gonna be discussing how fresh these items were?
Well, we might do that, and that's a consideration for all of us. Produce prices, according to something I saw on I don't even know where I saw it yesterday, but Whole Foods prices went down on average of 43% yesterday at Whole Foods.
Yes.
Also everywhere.
Do you know why?
I do, if nobody else does. Oh, do you know, I assume?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, Amazon bought
Oh,
Whole
yeah.
Foods. We started talking about this in my marketing class, which is a little bit why John is pitching this to me, is, you've got things like Blue Apron, these different companies that you can order pre-made, pre-packaged meals that all you have to do is cook them, they send you all the ingredients, that kind of stuff. Half of the thinking for what Amazon is doing is basically all of these Whole Foods restaurant stores are going to be more or less fresh ingredient warehouses for this Amazon pantry, doing a meal service thing like that. And so it's a beautiful thing by Amazon taking over Whole Foods. It's going to give Amazon a more local presence for doing food delivery, but then it's also going to be a local presence for people to come to buy Amazon products. The takeover happened yesterday, and as of yesterday, the little Amazon Echoes and that kind of stuff were on the shelves in the Whole Foods to be sold. So it's this nice little, to use the buzzword, synergy there. And one of the things Amazon wants to do is Whole Foods foods have been fairly expensive, but in order to make the strategy work, they actually need people to be coming into Whole Foods. So they, across the board, the first day when the takeover officially happened is, as John said, they lowered their prices. Ultimately to get more people in so they can sell more stuff. Woohoo. Yes.
My question is, why is the price of beef so expensive? Like, I went to Food Lion yesterday to do, one of the stores, Food Lion, for the project lab, and I went to pick up a chuck roast, and I was looking for one in the packaging where it has the styrofoam tray, but they didn't have it like that. It was in like a vacuum seal type deal, and the least expensive one I could find, because when you do a chuck roast, you do like a crock pot type thing, that's chuck roast is the best thing to put in there,
Okay, I'll take your
Well,
word for that.
Well, what do you think? Because I saw like a shoulder portion that was less expensive.
Well, you're asking cooking questions, and that's beyond my pay grade.
Oh, well, I was just wondering why is the price of meat?
Well, one of the bigger factors for the price of beef being so high, well, there's the traditional supply and demand, the number of cows out there and the demand for beef. But then part of it is the number one cost for cattle is feed. Well, okay, labor probably, then feed. And some of the feed for cattle involves various grains like corn, and a lot of our corn is being diverted into our gas tanks and other things like that. As we're coming up with more uses for these various grains and crops, which John will end up getting into, that's just making the feed for the animals that much more expensive. Your dog food is probably got more expensive because they put a bunch of corn in it. Just use that as an example, but not the cows eat a whole lot of corn unless they're getting silage. But there's a whole lot that goes into it. You know, a drought is going to affect the price of wheat, something a wheat crop, which is going to affect the price of wheat, which affects the price of bread, but it also affects the price of, you know, other feeds, and ultimately we'll go back to the price of pork and the price of beef. And, I mean, there's a whole big snowball that goes into that.
I would.
And Carolyn, let me add a little bit to what Tom said. Back, it's been several years ago, there was a major weather issue in the Midwest, which is a major corn producing area. And they had a lot of drought and greatly reduced the volume of feeds, corn and so forth. Corn went, and this was about the time that the ethanol mandate took place, that they had to use a portion of the corn to produce ethanol to put it into the gasoline. So it put a real crunch on the availability of corn. It went from an average of $3.50 to $4 a bushel to on towards $8 a bushel. With that, the shortage of hay, there was a tremendous sell-off in cattle because the actual producers couldn't afford to feed them, which reduced the cattle numbers. And now that there's more corn available, it takes about 2 years to begin to reconstruct this production cycle to get the populations of cattle back up to its normal level. And we just have gone through that, and that's gone up. But as you know, with pricing of products, if they ever go up, it's really a long time before they come back down to even with supply and demand. So we're still suffering from this elevated cost of red meats in particular. So that accounts for some of it. And you talked about the packaging. Packaging of meats is something that's changed over the past couple of years. That one that you wanted in the tray would have been cut in the store.
Yes.
That one that was vacuum sealed probably was done in a manufacturing facility of some sort, and it had been packaged and shipped to you that way. So I'm like you, I prefer that one that's been fresh cut rather than the one that's vacuum sealed. So.
Yes, sir, especially, with the price of it being that expensive, I prefer.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm like you, I prefer that. And, it all relates to the basic premises of marketing these ag products. And that's sort of what I've been doing this morning, dealing with my grapes. We're reaching the point in the season when I need to have final commitments on the tonnage that I've got. And I had a little bit of surplus, so I posted them on our website over the weekend, and I've gotten 4 inquiries in the last 2 days about grapes. And I've actually sold 2 tons as I walked over here this morning. So
Awesome.
it may be awesome, it may not be. It's going to be a whole lot more work for me to get it done this weekend. So, but anyway, any other questions or details we need to iron out before we try to finish this first chapter? Anybody?
Oh yeah, by the way,
Go.
I will have my book for this class and one Thursday.
Okay, we've gotten to the point in the chapter talking about GMOs. We touched on this a little bit the other day, and Tyler has been interested in Monsanto and Roundup Ready type crops and in GMOs. I'm going to pose a question to all of you. How do you feel about genetically modified organisms or GMOs, genetically modified crops? You got any feelings one way or another?
No. As long as they won't make me or my family sick, I won't really see any issue with them.
Okay. Why would you think they'd make your family sick?
You never know how altering the genes of something could change its chemical makeup and affect allergies potentially.
Okay.
But they likely take that into account whenever they're fiddling with it.
All right. I think Mother Nature's been doing for the entire length of time.
Altering them to survive.
That's exactly right. Mother Nature has modified crops through natural selection. Only thing that's taken place with the genetically modified crops is that man has facilitated the change in this genetic makeup. And who's to say Mother Nature wouldn't have eventually done that? Okay. Mother Nature is doing it in that a lot of the pesticides that we may use are no longer effective. Some of the herbicides that we use are no longer effective on some of the weeds that we treat them for.
They've grown resilient.
They've grown resistant to it. So that is a genetic modification that Mother Nature has done. So all man has done, all these scientists have done, is kind of sped up the process, and they've taken it in a direction in which it is a benefit. This is why the corn production that we were talking about has come, the production has increased, and thus the price has come down. Because instead of having 150 bushels to the acre, they're approaching 300. Some is even getting us higher than that. Because of the manipulation of the cropping cycles and the way they're doing it. And it's greatly enhanced the production of these crops, particularly corn, soybeans, and the major grains. So,
I believe soybeans.
Yeah. There is another thing that lends itself to what you were talking about with, you have the idea of potentially making you sick. Nothing will ever be released that offers any danger to humans, but there has been a genetic modification in some of the sweet corn we have, in that they have imparted what's called a BT, which is a naturally occurring bacteria, into the seed, and that transmits through the production of the plant to prevent, and BT is effective against worms. So this has made it possible for you to get perfect ears of sweet corn out of your garden or in the grocery store without the application of pesticides. So in essence, genetically modified organisms reduce the use of a lot of pesticides by having knowledge and knowing how to manipulate those and work things. So the idea is that GMOs are a detriment, in my eyes, is not correct. We all have exposure to folks that tend to be somewhat fanatical about some things, and in my eyes, that's what one of these. One of them. Do any of you have any opposition to GMOs? Nobody? Carol? You guys? All right. Well, we'll move along. There's a chart in your textbook that talks about measurements, and it for purposes of this class, it's good to have an understanding of what we refer to as measurements. Whether we're talking about measurements of length would be centimeters, meters, foots, or a foot. A meter is equal to 3.3 feet and 3 inches, things of that type. A hectare, we talked about that a little bit the other day. A hectare is 2.47 acres. But this is just something that we won't spend a lot of time on, but I think that you would probably need to be aware of some of these conversions, particularly the more common ones. And these measurements are used when scientists are conducting the experiments that they do, whether we're talking about animal science or plant science. These units of measure are essential to those discussions. There's a little bit of discussion in the latter portion of this chapter talking about experimentation and randomization. You guys haven't gotten to the point in your educational career where you'll be doing much in the way of experimentation, but if you ever go on and to get an advanced degree, you may be asked to do some sort of research project and to have results that are expected to be reasonable and not have variations based upon the layout of the experiment. You'll have to have something that's called randomization. This is just a brief discussion of how you would set up a randomized plot for experimental purposes. And I won't elaborate on it, but when we did our lettuce project here a couple of years ago, we had to randomize our plot design so that we would have results that we could evaluate statistically and didn't have any effect of location or other variables into our research project. So there's a lot in here that talks about data interpretation and things of that type, but that's we won't spend any time on that. And that pretty well finishes the first chapter. Let me jump along and I'll try to get the second chapter up here for us, and we'll begin that discussion today.
John, are you going to be showing stuff on the screen?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll enjoy looking at Tyler's more then.
Yeah.
Smile,
Tyler's
big smile,
Tyler's
big smile.
photogenic. Yeah, he's hadn't finished his pretzels this morning, but he'll work on that.
I'm just making sure that's just a fist and he ain't showing me any fingers.
Yeah, no, he's kept those confined. As we start into chapter 2, we begin to talk a little bit more about plants and plants environment and things of that type. And the word ecosystem comes up as we begin this discussion. What's an ecosystem?
All living things within an environment.
Yep.
Living and non-living, literally the area around you.
Okay, ecosystem.
Okay, you're right, Tyler. Yeah, it's a community of plants, animals, and other organisms. And we've got a physical ecosystem, and we've got an environmental ecosystem. So, this chapter is going to begin a discussion about the various components of the ecosystem in which we reside. And it varies. That was one reason I asked Tom the question this morning about rain, because here in Martinsville or Collinsville today, we were getting rain. And 20 miles west of here, it was not. I called my wife a while ago to ask her if it was still rain, if it had rained there. She says no. And when I pulled up the radar this morning, you could see a very distinct line of demarcation about where the rain was falling. And it broke right around our area. We are currently under the influence of a tropical system that's going up the East Coast. It's probably off the Outer Banks right now. And this is a component of the ecosystem. And as we talk about that, The eastern part of the state is going to probably get 2 to 3, maybe 4 inches of rain. Thank goodness, nothing like what's going on in Texas. How many of you are aware of what's going on in Houston, Texas, and in the southeastern part of the country down there? You have any idea what they're having to endure? What's causing their problem?
No.
Flooding.
Yeah.
Flooding there.
Hurricane Harvey.
Able to.
Hurricane Harvey formed in the Gulf, and it went down and touched the Mexican coast, and then it sort of deviated and started turning north. And last weekend, it wasn't thought that it was going to be a major weather. And as it got out over the warmer waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it began to gain strength. It was Monday, it was a Category 1, and it moved to a Category 2 hurricane. Before it hit the coast of Texas, it went 3 to a 4, Category 4, very rapidly, which means it had much higher winds. And the way that the storm developed, it didn't have much in the way of steering currents. And the jet stream from air that travels around the world and controls our weather had separated somewhat and was on a more northern track. So it didn't have an opportunity to steer this hurricane at all. So it was just sort of philandering around on the coast there, and the weather reporters began to realize the volume of rain that was going to come out of this system, and they started talking about it in terms of feet rather than inches. And I think to this point that a lot of the Houston, Galveston area of Texas has had somewhere between 28 and 32 inches of rain. Major flooding, just an enormous catastrophe there. The winds from the hurricane were not, they were really bad in a really small area, and I did an awful lot of damage there. But the hurricane sort of wallowed up into the southern part of Texas, and now it's moved back down into the Gulf and regained its strength a little bit. And they think it's going to hit again somewhere on the border between Louisiana and Texas, and then eventually did travel north. There's some, they don't really know about how the rainfall is going to fall from that now. If it goes on the northern track and doesn't deviate from that much, we probably won't have much rain from it. But if it deviates 300 or 400 miles to the east, southwest will actually get substantial rainfall. I'm talking about down in Richlands, where Southwest Virginia Community College is, and 3 of our students are there. If it deviates just a little more to the east, we here at Patrick Henry will get, 2 to 3 inches of rain, and you guys may not get any in Southside. They don't really know at this point where it's going to go because of these steering currents with the jet stream. They're not strong at this point in the an animal. But all of this, the tropical storm is a component of what we call the ecosystem. And the area in Texas where they've had so much rain is not normally affected by heavy rains until we get a tropical storm. They talked about it being an area that's somewhat arid and dry and sandy. So there's concern now because of all the heavy rain, flooding, and so forth. They've got alligators in people's backyards, snakes in their attics, because of them trying to get away from the snakes in particular, trying to get out of the heavy the rain flooded area. So there's a lot of concern. Yes.
Did you see on the news this morning there was a hawk that flew in somebody's car and wouldn't leave?
I didn't hear what you said. What?
There was a hawk that flew in somebody's car to get out of all the flooding and it wouldn't leave.
Well, do you blame him? That's the first place he found it was dry.
They had to take it to some sort of animal rescue place.
And, you know, we're talking about this a little bit in jest, but it's a severe situation for the people that are there because of the hawk being in the car. That was a totally unique environment, different thing. You don't expect that to happen, but it's a factor of the ecosystem. The hawk was trying to survive. So, you know, that's why snakes will move up in these people's attics, because that's one of the places that they can find that they're out of so much rain. It's a severe situation that we're looking at, and you know, those people have my sympathy. You know, it's just terrible. But as we talk about an ecosystem, Tyler was correct. It is the plants, the animals, the land, the soil, the water, the air, everything that is around us is a portion of our ecosystem. And ecosystems determine what thrives and survives in a given area. And we'll talk as we move along in this chapter about the various ecosystems that we have. My wife gets kind of irritated with me because I enjoy watching some of these nature type programs that are on the History Channel, particularly the guys in Alaska that are trying to survive. They're surviving in 20 below weather, and they're trying to harvest what they call fur. In other words, fur-bearing animals to be a portion of their subsistence. That's one of the few means that they have to make any money. And a beaver is a highly prized pelt for them, quite often bringing as much as $200. So, you know, they are trying to survive in a harsh type of ecosystem where there's not any opportunity for a lot of things, nothing to grow except in a very short period of the year. And we'll talk about other types of ecosystems that are, you know, the desert ones. We'll talk about those and try to gain a little better understanding of those. I think that we are very fortunate in the areas in which we reside to have some of the luxuries that we do as far as Mother Nature's concerned. And there's a lot of variation within our service areas. The environment and so forth that exist in Southside enables them to grow crops that don't thrive and do well here in Patrick Henry or in Martinsville, Henry County area. And then Southwest is another type of environmental situation. A lot of it's due to the topography that we have. Elevation at Southside is, I believe they said, between 600 and 700 feet above sea level in a lot of cases. There's some variation in that because of the rolling hills that we've got. We here at Patrick Henry are sitting at about 800 feet right now. My home is at 1175. Southwest has tremendous variations. I think that the college at Richlands is around 2,000 feet. Dwayne Farthing, that used to help us with some of our instruction, his home was at about 3,300 feet. So, you know, the topography and landmass variations create different ecosystems. They're actually microenvironments that we use to facilitate the production of crops and or animals. The production areas in Southside is more prone to tobacco, corn, and wheat, soybeans than what we have here in our area because of the size of the fields that they can have. We have some corn, soybean, wheat production here, but the fields are quite small compared to them. Southwest has very little of that. They'll grow a little bit of corn, but soybeans and wheat they don't do because of the rocky terrain. They do a lot more in the way of pastures, hay. They produce a lot more animals than we do right here. So it's quite varied and different as we talk about ecosystems. we will spend a little bit of time talking about the cultivation of the crops. Cultivation has changed during my lifetime. The old school way of doing it was to plow the land and cultivate it and plant crops in a good seed bed. That's sort of a technology that's gone by the wayside because we've learned that it's costly to plow the land. It's a detriment to the land because it will erode either by wind erosion or water erosion. So a lot of the major production areas now have gone to a no-till type of production. I think most of the tobacco is still done on cultivated land, but corn, the wheat, the soybeans are done in a no-till fashion using an assortment of herbicides. In other words, chemicals to kill out weed populations and control weeds as they move along. That's one of the advantages of cultivation. You can control weed populations by the manipulation of soil.
Kind of odd since I actually live right beside farms, like literally across the road from it, and the man is growing soybeans this year, and he's took about 2 or 3 weeks, give or take, on and off, plowing his field before he planted soybeans.
Did he really? That's not the norm now. Normal production of soybeans in most of the areas, they'll grow a wheat crop first, they'll harvest the wheat, and then they'll come right in behind that with a no-till drill and put the seed in without cultivating. Then they'll come back next year because of the crop rotation. The soybean will add a lot of nitrogen to the soil it's a legume that will add nitrogen to the soil, so they'll follow the soybean with a corn crop to use that nitrogen that the soybean put in and reduce their need for fertilizer. So it's part of a crop rotation that better agricultural producers have gone to using. A friend of mine has got grapes planted on an old farm situation that had been cropped in tobacco, and tobacco again until it was absolutely worn out. There was no organic matter, fertility left in that soil at all. So it made it extremely hard for him to establish a vineyard there. He had to really work hard to get that done. We're out of time. We just got started a little bit in the ecosystem thing. We'll talk about that some more when we get back together on Thursday, talking about the ecosystem. So if you guys, any of you got any questions about ecosystems or what we've talked about today, otherwise be careful, don't run over one another going out the door.
Okay, thank you.
Moving. Chair.